everybody to the webinar this afternoon. I appreciate so much that most of you have just done a full day at school and you're giving your time up after school. We very much appreciate that. We're joined today by some of our colleagues here at the Teachers and Teaching Research Centre at the University of Newcastle. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. You can see on the screen there, we are recording this webinar, but it'll only record in presentation mode, so it won't see the participants. Please keep your cameras on and your microphones muted. If you could use the three dots at the top right-hand side of your tile to make sure your name appears as first name, last name. That way, if we've got questions, we can address you appropriately. You can use the chat function as we go if you have questions, or you can wait till the end and unmute at the end if you've got any questions. Before we begin, Drew, can you change the slide, please? I'd like to acknowledge that we are presenting today on the unceded lands of the Pambalong clan of the Awabakal people and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I extend that respect to any Indigenous colleagues who are joining us today. I consider myself very lucky to work on lands that have always been places of learning, and I continue my learning journey here every day. This afternoon, I'd like to introduce Dr. Drew Miller, Deputy Director of the Teachers and Teaching Research Centre, and Primary School Principal Nathan Collins to present QT Pulse, new research on school wellbeing. Welcome, Drew, and welcome, Nathan.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks very much, and thanks, Nathan, for joining us, and thank you for all the teachers and leaders that have joined us online today too. So, really, we're talking about today is this this survey, this tool for schools that we developed. It looks pretty simple there. It's called the QT Pulse School Health Longitudinal Survey. Rolls off the tongue, that name. QT Pulse is what we call it, and that's exactly its purpose is for schools to take pulse checks of their culture, of what's happening at their school. And so we developed this survey as a tool for schools because we were working with schools in partnership with longitudinal partnerships. And what we found was that schools having access to how their staff were feeling about change, about implementing a new program, how they were perceiving leadership to be going about, implementing that program, what wellbeing, morale, burnout were like at the school, became really important information on an ongoing basis for the school when we were working across 2 or 3 years. And so we thought, you know what, instead of running this every time for a school or for multiple schools, what we'll do is we will automate this process. And so we spent a lot of time trying to, work within the university systems to create a tool which we house as part of the QT Academy for schools to use. And I'll tell you, there's a couple of versions in a minute, and we'll go through that and look at the differences between those things. But there is a free version of this tool, and that was a really important component. We wanted to get it out to schools so that they could also monitor their culture and monitor change at their schools the way that we were doing it in our research settings. So here's the sort of the go-through list of how to engage in it. So it's a principal sign up. So the principal gives consent. There's a link sent out to the principal, and that's a school level link. So it's only used at a school, and it's repeatedly used. You don't have to ask us for a link each time. You just use the same one and you add to your questionnaire from there. You complete it in a staff meeting, ideally. And there's a couple of stats around this completion, and it normally takes around 15 to 20 minutes for staff. And Nathan is going to talk to this a little bit after I've presented some data to you. But on average, we observe about 85% compliance if staff are given time in, say, a staff meeting. And I know staff meetings are precious and things like that. And so that sort of becomes part of valuing the data that you're getting out of this. When principals grab the survey and say, hey, everyone, just fill it out, and they send a link off, we generally see about 38 is the average compliance, 38% of staff that engage across a school. So really giving time and valuing its completion also means valuing the data. And there's some pluses in doing that. The report comes back, it's normally a little less than 5 days, but it depends. Sometimes there's a run over of a week, or you can contact us and say, look, we had some completed and not others, and we can hold it over for you and things like that. So there's a little bit of that in there as well. And then you repeat it. every couple of terms. Now, some schools do it on a term basis. We see most schools do it every couple of terms. And we would recommend a couple of terms. We use normally a term 1 and a term 3 kind of pulse check in our research studies, basically because we want to avoid term 4 because everyone's tired and your results normally get skewed by that. And so if you're consistently asking in term 1 and term 3, and we say, look, try and ask even in the same week of term 1 and term 3, so that you're not getting that sort of seasonal adjustment across the term. And so that's the process of going through the pulse. What's it have in it? Well, the domains that we use are personal, collective, and information about students. And there's a range of constructs. I won't I won't detail all of them. I'm going to show you some questions that are in the survey in a minute, and that'll give you a bit more of an understanding and present some data. So again, that'll give you more understanding of what we collect. There's a free version. You get some of the information in all of that. And then there's a premium version, which obviously costs us more in terms of the turnaround and what we've had to do to get all of that information. And so there's a cost attributed to that. And it's on the website. Steve may flash it up in the chat because I always forget because I don't run the academy. I help with the research. But the key points here are that staff are anonymous. So when staff log on, they're asked to contribute their email, and we just use their email to track responses across time so that we can link individuals across time. And that's really important in modeling things across time to look at changes within person. But that staff are anonymous is really important because they feel like, thanks, Steve, because they feel like they can give appropriate answers. It's not the principal that's getting it. It's not just a Google Forms survey where they fill out their responses and the principal can see. The staff are anonymized in the reporting. So the principal and the executive never get to see which staff are, how staff are feeling. It's aggregated data that's always sent back in the report. And I'm going to show you just a snapshot of the report in a second. Staff consent to be involved. Because we do structure this as research. So there's a consent process there. Staff don't have to consent to that. So some staff drop out for that reason, but the majority we've found don't have a problem with it. And essentially here it's ideal for making that culture visible because your staff aren't responding to you as a leader. They're responding to a survey from an external agency. And so there's a safety barrier in there and you're more likely to get good responses, right? So responses of honesty. And that's really, really important when you really want to know what's going on at schools. These are the reports that come out of it. The baseline report there is on the left. And essentially we look at, we try and give you some comparison to schools that are similar to yours. Because it's a baseline report, it's hard for us to give you a lot of information, but what it will do is it'll display both where you sit in terms of averages. You can see that top grid, but also the distribution. So you can see down the bottom, we've got distributions there. So you can tell if you get to the burnout one and you've got a high proportion of staff that are in the high burnout, down in this example, 33%, you've got a third of your staff. This is fake data, by the way. If you had a third of your staff that were, thinking that they're in the 8 to 10 in the burnout scale, well, that's not so great. And so it gives you that information to point you in the direction of things that you might want to work on. And then as you keep collecting data, you get this longitudinal report on the right. And again, it will show you the distributions. It breaks it down question by question. And it just gives you trend data and mean data. So the more consistent your questionnaire is for getting, most of your staff through it, the more reliable your information is going to be. But you build this picture across time. And there may be things that you are looking to focus on with staff. You might be implementing some cultural reform, things like that, that you might want to be building some cultures. And so some of these aspects will relate to you and you can watch them over time. So that's the data that you're getting. Today, I'm going to present you some information, some results from schools that have been filling this questionnaire out across a long period of time. And we're going to look at a big group of teachers for this, a pretty representative sample, but these are the questions and these are examples of those questions. I won't read through all of them. The only thing that you do need to know is the ones that are in grey there, so the wellbeing and the disposition outcome groups, they are negative questions. And so lower is better. All of the others, efficacy, health, professional community, leadership related things, higher is better. And I'll point that out in the survey, in the results as well, just to give you a bit more of an understanding of that. But that gives you, if you want to go back through the webinar and have a look at these questions, that gives you a bit of an example of the kinds of questions that are asked in each. Now, we don't use all of this data in the report, but the grid that I showed you before gives you an indication of the data that we do use. All right, so let's have a look at our data for today. So in all, we had 29 participants from 60 schools in this data set so far, and that's been gathered across about 3 years. What we're going to look at today are the classroom teachers. We're going to take all of the other data out of there, the head teachers, the school principals, the deputies. We've got learning and assistant teachers, teachers' aides. We've got admin staff in there. Some of the schools get their admin staff to fill it out, and so we're just going to focus on those classroom teachers. So we've got 1,200 classroom teachers that have filled this out at their first time point that we have data for. Now, this is just a little fun facts session from the data that I'm a PE teacher for my sins, and so I always like to have a think about how teachers are engaging with their health. And so what I want you to do is just have a think about these kind of numbers and just see how you go with these. So we've got physical activity, so that's 150. So that's 5 days of completing more than 30 minutes across a week, right? So I want you to just think about what proportion of teachers do you think. If you really want, you could chuck it in the chat to see how you go to publicize it. But just have a think about what proportion of teachers you think would get the Australian recommended intake or output of 150 minutes, greater than 150 minutes per week. Got a number? This is kind of like Andy. I'm sort of like Andy Lee off 100, but obviously not as rich.
Steve
Right.
thinks 40%.
Well, he's not bad. 30% of teachers in our survey, in that 1,200, which is pretty representative across school systems in terms of Catholic, independent, and public, and ICSIAs. We've got a wide range of ICSIAs and experiences, things like that. It's pretty representative of an Australian sample. What about strengthening 2 days a week? What proportion of teachers do we think go and do some strength work more than a couple of days a week? 38. They're actually not bad. That one surprised me. I thought that number would be lower, but there you go. That's good. People are obviously hitting the gym, and that's great. So, 38%, we're getting there. What about 7 hours of sleep a night? No one's looking tired. No one's yawning yet on the Zoom call. Well, 7 hours of sleep. We are good sleepers, teachers. 64% that are getting above 7 hours of sleep a night. That's not bad. So if we think about people that are engaged in all three of those, so meets all three of those, what proportion of teachers do we think are meeting all three? So they're getting their 150 minutes a week, they're doing their 2 days plus of strength work, and they're getting 7 hours of sleep.
20%, 10%.
10%. 15%. There you go. Bang in the middle.
Split
Not bad.
difference.
Well done. Well done. You've nailed it. Whoever those people were. All right. What about meets none? So it doesn't get any of those recommendations. So what proportion of teachers aren't getting 150, at least 150 minutes doing any strength work and getting under 7 hours sleep? 50%. That's big. That's big. All right. 20%. One in five teachers not meeting, right? So that's, that could be better, but that's always an interesting thing. And there are some relationships between the people that are meeting all three in terms of burnout. So unsurprisingly, they have lower levels of stress compared to the meets none group on the right. They have lower levels of burnout. Stress and burnout are related. We're going to talk about that in a sec. and their sleep quality is better. That was the interesting one that I found. Sleep quality seems to be a really big driver. So, and in fact, it doesn't necessarily matter whether you're getting the 7 hours, but if you are reporting that you're getting good sleep quality and you're waking up refreshed is probably a more important thing. So anyway, the people that were doing the exercise have greater sleep quality, and unsurprising because they're doing exercise. So there's some fun facts that have come out of that. We're going to talk about burnout today. Why are we talking about burnout? Well, we've got these indicators in the survey as well: stress, burnout, and intention to leave. Now, this is a mathematical model, and what it's telling us is that there is a relationship between stress and intention to leave. People with higher levels of stress have greater intention to leave the profession. That doesn't sound revolutionary. Burnout is the thing that mediates that relationship. So if I put burnout into that equation, essentially it takes all of the relationship between stress and intention to leave. You can see that it's really small down the bottom, and it moves it towards burnout. So basically it's saying the thing that is mediating whether teachers are stressed and feeling like they need to leave the profession or intend to leave the profession is if they're reporting to be burnt out. And we know that burnout isn't just a state of stress, or it's this kind of long-term exposure to high levels of stress that we don't cope with or can't handle. And different people have different levels of stress that they can handle. Some people can handle lots of stress. Other people are really low stress people. And if they get some stress, then it can move towards burnout quickly. So all people are different, right? But it's burnout that we want to focus on in that relationship. So let's have a look at this relationship between stress and burnout. This is the distribution in our survey of stress values and burnout values. So stress on the left, you can see the mean is 6.6. So teaching is a 6 to 7 out of 10 profession, right? So it's fairly high stress as a profession. You can see that it clusters around that 6 to 7 mark, but you also see in the 9 and 10 categories, there's only about 5 or 6% in those. So that's a good thing in our sample. It shows that, all right, that lots of people are, running at sort of elevated stress levels, but not huge amounts of people that are in that really, really high stress. Fortunately, in the burnout, we've got a slightly different distribution, right? We've got lower levels through to about 3.5 is around there, 3.6 as our average burnout value. But then there appears to be, we've got a good 40% of teachers in that 4 to 5, 5 to 6 kind of category. Now that's a lot. So what we're interested in is if we look at it this way. Now this is, we're sort of breaking the data down a little bit here, but what we've got across the top of that chart there are the stress values. So people that are reporting 0, 1, 2, right through to 10 as a stress value. And then in each of those buckets, we've got what they're reporting as a burnout score. And what we can see is that we've got this group that are around the average, because remember the average stress is 6.3, 6.4, right? And so we've got this group around the average stress, but 5, 6, or 7 that have all values of burnout. So if we look across the bottom of that chart, in stress level 5, we've got all of the burnout values from 0 to 6. In stress level 6, same, 0 to 6, all of the burnout values. Now these people in the 5, 6, or 7, they're reporting pretty similar levels of stress, but they're all reporting different levels of burnout. So what we're going to do is we're going to break that apart, and we're going to have a look at what's different about the people, because remember, they're all around the same level of stress. What's different in the groups of people that have higher levels of burnout versus those that are lower? So to do this, and this is just a model of how you do it, we take each of those categories and we split across the mean, a standard deviation across the mean, into 3 groups of burnout. So we're creating 3 groups of burnout within the stress group: a low, a medium, and a high. Same in the 6. So that means that we're not just using the distribution of scores to create our responses. We're looking for each level of stress. There are higher levels of burnout. And so that way, then we can cram all of those together to look at our data, right? So it's just a statistical procedure. This is the bit that you need to follow. The blue groups are the lower burnout groups. So remember, all of these groups have the same level of stress, right, on average. The blue people, they are low burnouts. The red people, not so good. They're the high ones. So we're really going to have a look at the differences between them and what is different. For what variables are they different on? So just remember that. Blue is good. Follow the blue. All right, so these are their stress levels. We can see their stress levels there, pretty much the same, 6.2, 6.4, 6.3. They're really similar in their stress levels. Those letters tell me that they're all statistically within the same group. There's no statistical difference. So if you see A, B, and C on those bars in future charts, you know that they are statistically different. There's enough evidence to suggest that there's something very different about those groups, right? So as we suspected, and the way that we modeled it, they've got the same levels of stress. What about their intention to leave? Well, no surprise, the lower burnout group has significantly lower intention to leave, and the two groups at 0.7 and 1.2 compared to the high burnout group. That makes sense to us. More burnout, more intention to leave. I modeled that earlier for you. All right. And this one, burnout. So we better just check that they in fact are a higher burnout group. And what do you know they are? A, B, and C, three statistically different groups. The low burnout group have low burnout. The high burnout group, they're reporting higher burnout. All right, so let's look at the other variables that are in the survey. Let's talk about our health behaviors. I'm going to throw a bunch of charts at you now, and we'll just unpack them. So our days of physical activity, they don't really seem to be different, right? So there's no real differences among the physical activity that the burnout groups are doing, right? Are exposing themselves to. The amount of sleep that they're getting, pretty similar, that sleep amount on the right. If we come down to strengthening, doesn't seem as though the three groups are getting any difference in terms of the days that they're exposing themselves to strengthening. There is a difference in sleep quality. So the groups, remember, they're all equally as stressed, these groups. They're around the average stress level, right? The low group has greater sleep quality and the higher group. And of course, you might be thinking, all right, well, maybe the sleep is contributing, the sleep quality is contributing to their burnout. And that's true. A lot of these things are cyclical. So we know that they interact with each other. All right, so nothing major in health behaviors except the sleep quality, but that might be a result of rather than something that's impacting. What about efficacy? So there doesn't seem to be much of a difference. There's a little bit of a difference in the means there. We can see that the low burnout group has slightly higher perceptions of their practice as being effective than the high burnout group. And so that could be that people are having a struggle at school, or they're struggling to get through to their kids or things like that. And so they might not feel as effective. But there's no really big differences there. So effective practice, not really an issue there. All right, what about dispositions? People's dispositions. Now remember, lower is better here, right? So the low group in terms of school readiness, and school readiness asks the question about my school can implement things well. My school is capable of giving the students what it needs. They're the kind of questions that we're asking here. So those those that are high in burnout have perceptions that are negative of their school. So they don't believe that their school is capable of serving its constituents, right? So they have higher beliefs that the school is incapable of doing that, or the school is incapable of change. That's how the questions are worded. Whereas those in the low groups, they're perceiving their schools as places that can change and deliver the way that those questions are worded. Teacher responsibility is about teachers accepting the responsibility for their students. So the questions would be worded things like, my students can't do the work. Those in the higher burnout group, they agree with that. They more strongly agree with statements like my students can't do the work, right? So more of the emphasis is on the students externally. With the lower burnout group, they believe less of that. So when we ask, your students can't do the work, they're saying, no, it's not the students, it's my responsibility. So they're taking a little bit more personal responsibility, is what that's interpreted as. And so there is a difference there. So perceptions are mattering, right, in terms of their dispositions. Leadership, look at those charts. This becomes important. We're going to talk to Nathan in a minute about this. Involvement in decision making, trust of leadership, surprise, surprise, and just perceptions of leaders as doing a good job for the school, role modeling, being available, supporting staff, right? What a surprise! Those that are in the lower burnout group have higher perceptions of their leadership. Those in the higher burnout group, well, they're not perceiving their leadership to be so strong, right? And so they may not feel as supported, which is potentially contributing to that relationship between stress and burnout. All right. What about professional community? This one is interesting as well. Collaboration. So there's a difference between low burnout groups and high burnout groups in that collaboration group on the left. So that's interesting, right? And we would expect that. You would have more people around you, you're collaborating more, you have more connections with your colleagues. Same with connectedness, right? I feel connected to my profession and the people at my school. I can be myself at my school. If you're responding high on those questions, you're probably feeling a little better about the school and about the environment, and you're probably receiving support from that environment. And so that shows up here. There's a significant difference between the low burnout group and the high burnout group. The high burnout group aren't perceiving to be as connected or feeling as safe to be themselves in their school. So that's interesting. School morale. Well, there's a big one there. Right. So there's no surprise that those who have lower burnout, but the same level of stress, are perceiving that their school morale is high. And this means that, they are more connected to their colleagues. They're more buoyant about the school and about what's going on, right? So, and little differences across, trust and respect and shared responsibility with colleagues as well, so being able to share difficult times or get through difficult things like curriculum implementation together and things like that, right? And so if you're able to have some shared responsibility, you're more likely here, it's suggesting, to be in the lower burnout group. So that's interesting. So if we kind of collect these findings, our drivers look like negative dispositions. So those that are perceiving that their school isn't capable of change, or that their students aren't capable of performing well. People who have higher beliefs in that manner, that seems to be a negative driver of that relationship between stress and burnout. The protective factors, quality of sleep. Do some exercise. The more exercise you get, the more quality of sleep you'll get, right? So there's the relationship there. Professional community, especially that morale one, and leadership structures. So if leadership is reliable, they're good role models, and there's this more distributed forms of leadership. So people have a say, they have some decision-making capacity. There's a little bit of self-determined motivation in there. These things seem to be more protective. There's no real relationship between efficacy or the health markers other than sleep quality. So there's no direct relationship between doing more physical activity, or it doesn't seem to be that these people are necessarily engaging in more physical activity. We could run it a slightly different way to look for that relationship, but it looks like that's a bit of a secondary relationship rather than this direct relationship between people are doing more exercise that are in the low burnout group. All right. So there are our findings. These things seem to be important. Now, how do we improve morale? Well, at the Quality Teaching Academy, we've got a thing called Quality Teaching Rounds, professional development. It's collaborative professional development where teachers get to engage in critical reflection in a safe environment, in a safe manner, to improve their practice. That brings them together. That vulnerability of working with your colleagues on your craft in a structured collegial way is really, really powerful for improving morale. We've seen that be really powerful across our studies and in our partnerships. The other way that's really helpful is to make it visible, and that's by engaging in something like the QT Pulse so that you can have conversations with staff. And that's where I really want to bring Nathan in. He's the man to talk to us about this because Nathan's been a principal at a few schools around the Newcastle area, and he's used the QT Pulse on a couple of occasions in each of those schools and in slightly different ways, but to make culture visible. So, Nathan, welcome along. Nathan's on school camp, everybody. So that's why it's looking very
Thank you,
warm and
Drew. Yeah.
Californian. Nathan, do you want to tell us about your experiences in using it? Because I'd really like to hear the practical side of things for people to understand how it's implemented and what you're using it for, and the kind of process of it, how it starts, how you engage with staff, things like that. And I'll throw a few questions at you along the way.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. Firstly, honored to speak on behalf of the survey. I'm finding it really helpful in the schools that I've worked at, and particularly exciting to look at your data that you've just shared there. Obviously that's new to me too, so really good. Makes me think I'm on the right way. I've worked at two schools and I've used both versions. So I've used the premium and the free version. And I guess I could talk just about the ease of use. It really is something that's very simple to implement in your school. And from a principal's perspective or a leadership perspective, we really want to know our teachers. We want to know how they feel. I want to support them and make sure that they want to work in my school, and they have those shared values and those shared drivers. And this, Pulse survey has been so wonderful in doing that. We actually do it once a term at the school that I work at. And I know you mentioned a different kind of model,
Mhm.
but we do it once a term. We then take it back to executive team, the results, and have a rigorous conversation about those and take a deeper dive into the things that, really particularly interest us. Whether it's, that there's a little bit less leadership trust for something, a decision that's been made, or that, people are feeling, more burnout or less burnout at a particular time in the year. We find that really helpful. What it does is it helps us to be a bit more adaptive in the things that we're doing at school to kind of, really, students are our number one priority when making decisions, but teachers, have to be really close because they're the ones driving improvement in our school. So, and then I guess from exec team, we have some strategic teams in our school. We take that data back to them, and then that drives key initiatives to support that. And it could be all different sorts of things, Joe. It could be like, quality teaching rounds. So I've worked at schools that have implemented quality teaching rounds successfully, and that's had a huge impact on staff morale and efficacy and culture in the schools that I've worked at. But for the school that I'm working at the moment, it's been more that our teachers have felt really heard and valued, and when we come back and share that data with our staff, and it helps them be part of that decision-making process about where we're going to go with our strategic improvement plan. So, yeah.
And how do you share it? Do you put it in a staff meeting? Do you present the results? How's that conversation go? Or do you pull bits out and say, look, this is a focus that there appears to be something happening here that we want to talk about with you. Just tell me about that.
Yeah, well, I guess it's layered, like I kind of described before. So we really look at the whole result from the survey together as an executive. We try and look at trends that we're noticing of concern, but we also don't want to layer on concerning areas too, because we want to have some positive share the positives. That's also a really important thing of it. Like actually, when I was sharing this the very first time, because we didn't have anything in place when I first started at the school. Our leaders felt really good because actually leadership trust was really, really high, and they felt really good about what they were doing, which was really good. So, that's a key one. But then it might be that we, pull out a piece of the data and share that with staff at a professional learning session and have that rigorous conversation. I wouldn't necessarily share the whole survey, but you could. Like, I don't think that would be a problem. There's nothing secret in there. And then usually we use that as a catalyst for some, really rigorous conversation about, teacher improvement or, some initiative that we're going to take on. So, yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, it's nice for people to hear about the process of it and what's happening. And I think even that I think even the existence of it, that you're using it and then going back to staff instead of it being secretive, I think there's a bit of secret sauce in there that you're giving, that
Yeah.
the visibility is important to staff. They've contributed to that result, and even if they are feeling a little disenfranchised, then they've had their say, and it means at least you're having a conversation about it. How can we do something about this rather than it being secretive? So I think you've sort of, that's probably a little secret sauce stuff from your side of things there.
100% agreed. And like the name of the survey suggests, it really just does give you that pulse check of where your staff are feeling. And any leader, good leader knows, don't they, that they really need to be consulting their staff. That you can't have this like top-down model of, dictatorship, I guess. That people want to be consulted. Even if you have a great idea, there has to be some level of consultation and involvement and collaboration. And actually, the survey's been really good in kind of coming back to them and making them part of that process. And actually, the other thing, like you said before, is just the fact that it exists and that it's visible in the school. The teachers are knowing that I actually care about how they feel and how they're tracking at that time.
Yeah, I think, and look, for us in terms of working with the schools from an improvement perspective, we've been in some schools where the professional community of the school was really struggling, like really, really, needed leadership to sort of fully rebuild that trust with their teachers and to get them on board again, and even that feedback loop that staff could see something was happening, that it was there, was really, really important in that improvement. Now, for us, I mean, as researchers, what we wanted to see was, we want to see the lines going up, right? So we're working with the school. The school's engaged in powerful professional development. They're doing some really coherent stuff across a long period of time. We wanted to see them, feel good about the way they're engaging with each other. Leadership were really interested in, is the leadership line going up? Are they, there was this constant kind of, we'd present their results to them at a bit of a meeting with the executive, and they were always, get to the leadership one, kind of thing. And so there was a bit of that as well. So it's
Well,
but
Drew, can I say, absolutely, you want to know how you're going as a leader, don't you? And this is a nice little, I guess, taste of, how, in an anonymous way, how people are perceiving leadership and their trust around, what's happening in the school. So, for me, like, it is actually nice to read that I'm on the right track in my school and we're trending the right way.
yeah, nice. Now, you've used it at a couple of schools. Is there, do you think there was a difference with the sort of your arrival at the new school? Can I ask that? Was it sort of something that you purposefully thought in implementing that it might be, good to sort of set that cultural expectation?
Yeah, 100%. Two very different schools. At my previous school, we were really heavily involved in quality teaching rounds, and not until I started there. And it was a school with, a culture that was really struggling, that school. I've moved to this school and have been there over a year now. And at the point of time, school culture was a little bit unsteady, and we weren't really measuring it. There wasn't a tool in place to be able to do that, other than having some open forum conversation in, a collaboration session or something. So for us, this is a really nice, safe version of how to kind of know your staff and how they feel about the school and how they feel about leadership and how they feel about the students and how they feel about how things are being handled too. Like there's a huge student section to it. So for me, it was essential to be able to do this at the school I was at. because I wanted to show that I care and I do care about them and how they're going in the school. And in the end, I just want to keep improving school culture. So for me, this is a no-brainer. This is something that will continue in our school so far.
Yeah, nice, nice. And any hints or tips? This is a bit of an off the cuff question, but in terms of that school culture, and you were saying you sort of have leadership groups, and you might have some different committees sort of monitoring different things at the school and different priorities. Has there been anything particular into? I'm always interested to hear about how schools are trying to improve their culture. Sometimes it is around that teaching and learning stuff, but sometimes schools just need to come together more in various ways. Is there anything that you're sort of doing with your school, or there's a focus of you're all on school camp together doing the tough work? Like what's happening in that space?
Yeah, the 5 hot tips from Nathan Collins.
Yeah,
Look,
yeah, rip it up.
I think that the more I've been the leader, the more I've realized you really just need to be visible. You need to be a really active listener. And this survey is really part of listening and hearing my staff. Um, you really have to be collaborative in leadership and consult as much as you can with big decisions, even if you've got them in your head and they're the golden nuggets that are going to make your school the best school ever. You can't just come down and kind of you have to really give the why. And I don't know. I hope that answers your question. I'm not really sure. Am I? Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, they're two great things to engage your staff, and I think that you've hit on those 2 points. Is one, you've really got to care about the school and how it's going, and thinking and two is the collaborative deeper leadership. So more distributed forms of leadership. We generally see improved cultural aspects. There's got to be controls around that in terms of how people are being asked to engage in being a leader across the board. But yeah, I'd say as a top 5 there, that's a great 2. So you've nailed the top 2 of the hot 5. So nice. I
Yeah,
like.
it's a secret content. The other 3, I can share those later. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
good. Now, what I do wonder if there are any questions from anyone on the floor, or anyone listening along, that any questions about how the question is used, or about any of the functioning or any of the specifics of the question.
There's one question from Eric, which says, are the survey questions for burnout and stress, etc., valid and retest reliable?
They are. They come from validated test batteries that we've used. So we're using the sort of research versions of the questions. Now, of course, the validity is directly connected to things like seasonal variation. So you've got to be really careful there. And that's why we say, look, if you can ask week 3 of term whatever each time, or you've got this kind of regular interval that you can get this thing done, then you're taking one form of variability out of it. Obviously, the more that you ask, Nathan's asking it, in each term to get responses, and then of course across a year or more, you'll actually see the seasonal variability and see if you are moving above that kind of seasonal variability. So all of those things play to that kind of validity and reliability of those questions as well. So and in many cases, we'll use multi-question comparisons. So we try not to use single levels. The things like stress and burnout are single. Burnout's is a 4 item. We use a shorter 4 item. Stress is a single item. So that's whether we'd use the burnout one as a bit more reliability as a question in your school. So there's a few things like that, but yes,
awesome. And then there's some feedback from Barbara, who says it'd be good to split stress. Is it in the classroom or with leadership employee relationships? Be good to measure the results against how many years the teacher has taught. And the key to fix stress is trust.
I agree that the key to fixing stress is trust and listening to staff, definitely. The interesting thing about about years of experience, the one thing that we see, that we see different stress levels in particular across leadership levels. So higher levels of leadership come with higher levels of stress generally. Hope you're going all right, no? But the thing that we see with experience really is that perception of practice. So it's that efficacy that changes across time. So older teachers have higher levels of efficacy than younger teachers, right? And we've run some studies on whether that's actually a real thing in terms of the quality of teaching when we measure the quality of teaching, or whether it's efficient belief. So yeah, there's a bit that goes into that. But yeah, there's all kinds of relationships between and among a lot of those variables. We haven't engaged in publishing a lot of this stuff because it's more so that this is about the schools engaging in a tool for them. We wanted to present this as a tool. It's set up as a research process so that we can actually use the processes and systems that we have available through our organisation at the University of Newcastle, but more so to use those systems as opposed to publishing 10 papers on burnout or responses. But there are really interesting relationships between and among, and so that exercise one I find fascinating, that there's not actually a direct relationship between those that are feeling more stressed and the amount of exercise they're doing, but the people that are doing more exercise and are meeting those guidelines, what do you know, their sleep hours are greater and their sleep quality is greater, and they're running lower stress and lower burnout. So that in my mind, without formalizing that mediating relationship, is evidence to say get some more exercise, just because I want validity that doing more exercise is good. That's why we go and run around in the morning. So yeah. So there's the QR code for anyone. That'll take you straight to the QT Pulse site on the QT Academy website, or you can email me if you want to have a conversation about it or check any more details. And if there's no more questions, we will draw it all to a close. Steve, did you have something before we go?
Yeah, I just want to add a recent presentation I was at by one of our schools. It wasn't actually about the Pulse, but they raised the Pulse survey that they've been using for a number of years. And they're a private school, an independent school, but they were talking about the benefits, and Nathan touched on some of those. Yeah, that their staff appreciate the Pulse survey because they get things raised that they might not otherwise raise. The executive team love the Pulse survey because they get to see things and they can see the changes because they've been doing it for a number of years now. They can see the impact of initiatives that they've put in place as a result of the points raised by earlier Pulse surveys. But the new one to me was actually they have a school board, and the school board really enjoy the Pulse survey, and it's now become one of the key things that they table at every quarter. When the Pulse survey comes through every term, that's one of the key things, because the board like to be able to monitor it to sort of see how are things. They feel it's the feedback they're getting from the staff. They don't necessarily get that direct connection. So it was just a different aspect that I hadn't sort of appreciated the value of the Pulse. So, yeah.
Yeah, wonderful.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Drew. Thanks, Nathan.
Thanks, Nathan.
Lots of lovely comments thanking you for your presentation and for the insights and how interesting it was. So this presentation will be recorded and will be emailed to everybody who was registered. So if you want to listen to it again, that will be available in the next week or so.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.